This feels a little bit like setting out a dating profile, but for books. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am going to be taking the Bookish Buzzwords and Boxes tag. This tag was created by Lizzie Faye Loves Books, and it's kind of talking about what things that you look for when you're reading a book. What are the things that definitely draw you in, and what are the things that when you read about them in a book, it kind of puts it into a 5-star category for you. So, question 1 is one that will definitely not surprise anyone who is a regular here. What is your go-to favorite genre of books? For me, it's contemporary adult romance. I am the biggest contemporary adult romance fan. I absolutely love getting caught up in the love stories, finding out how these people get on with each other, how do they kind of interact with each other. I love kind of watching the drama unfold. I absolutely adore love stories like that because it kind of gives you a little bit more of a bounce in your step when you're reading books like this, and it makes you feel like there is good stuff out in the world again. Question 2 is, what kind of retellings are you drawn to? I don't actually read a lot of retellings, but the ones that I have read have been kind of fairy tale retellings. The one that I really enjoyed recently was Tangleweed and Brine by Deirdre Sullivan, which is kind of a retelling of several different fairy tales from like fairy tale lore. Deirdre has also recently written a book called Savage Her Reply, which is a kind of a feminist retelling of the Children of Lear, one of the stories from Irish mythology, but told from the perspective of Aoife, who is the stepmother in the story and kind of seen throughout the original story as the villain. Another fairy tale retelling that I've absolutely adored is The Surface Breaks by Louise O'Neill, which is a retelling of The Little Mermaid, but in a much more feminist setting. I have got a couple of other fairy tale retellings on my TBR. I've got Of Curses and Kisses by Sandia Menon, which is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast set in like a boarding school kind of castle environment. I also have Geekerella by Ashley Poston, which is a retelling of Cinderella but set in a kind of Comic-Con atmosphere. I do also kind of really like classic retellings, especially classics that I would have studied or read quite a lot. I've read recently a book called Meg and Joe by Virginia Cantor. I didn't really love it very much, but it was a kind of a more modernized retelling of Little Women, told from the perspective of Meg and Joe. I didn't love so much what they did with Meg's character, but I felt like Joe's character was really well developed in this retelling. And there's also going to be Amy and Beth, which is obviously going to focus on Amy and Beth from the original books, and I'm really excited to see what happens with that one. Question 3, what are the lifestyles or careers of the characters that you love reading? I trained as a journalist. And I love reading about journalists because it's a story that I'm familiar with. It's a world and a kind of setup that I know quite a lot about. I know what should be done in this instance, or, oh, they've done something that they shouldn't have done here. Is there going to be a repercussion, or are we just going to sweep it completely under the rug? I love reading about things like that I know and that I am very familiar with. However, I was also raised in a house filled with teachers. Both of my parents are teachers in separate sections. So I like reading about teachers as well and seeing what kind of stresses do they have and does it match up with the stresses that my parents would have brought home from work. What is life like in the classroom, for example? How does their life as a fictional teacher match up with the realistic portrayal of a teacher that I would have seen when I was growing up? Something else that I also love reading and that I have requested quite a lot from NetGalley is books set in cafes and with cafe owners as the main character. I don't know what it is, it just feels so completely cozy and like a world that I really want to escape into, that there's just something about a book that's set in a cafe and a cafe owner. It's kind of like living vicariously because I've always wanted to own my own cafe, and I have like little business plans of what I would do, what kind of food I would serve, what kind of atmosphere the cafe would be in. So it's kind of like living vicariously through that. Question 4 is, what kind of settings or places or locations are you drawn to in books? A big one that might surprise you is Australia. Since I was young, I have always wanted to live in Australia for some amount of time. My family and I went on like a 3-week to a month holiday when I was about 12, and I just fell in love with the country. There's something about the country and there's something about the atmosphere in Australia. Everybody there felt really laid back and like just very friendly, and something that I would be familiar with as an Irish person, that's the kind of atmosphere that we give off as well. But there was just something about Australia that every time I see it mentioned in a book, it goes immediately into my basket, no matter where I'm buying it from. Another one that I really love is books set by the seaside. I grew up about half an hour's drive away from the seaside, and we used to go there quite a lot during the summer, especially when it was really warm for that like 2 day stretch in Ireland summers where you get sun and temperatures of like 25 up degrees. I don't live near the seaside anymore. My nearest beach is actually about a 3 or so hour car drive from here. And that is something that I really miss. I just miss going to the beach, standing in like the lap of the waves as they're coming towards you, and your feet kind of getting wet from the waves that are coming in towards you, and just staring out at the horizon and knowing that there's so much potential out there. There's so much that could be happening to other people's lives on the other side of the ocean that they're looking at the same ocean that you're looking at right now from a totally different perspective. There's just something about the seaside that makes it feel like a great place to set a book and a great place to read a book. Another thing though that I really love in books, and I also do request quite a lot of these from NetGalley, is cozy little tiny villages with like 200 people living there. That's the kind of place that I grew up. I grew up in the smallest place you can think of with like 200 and 250 people living there. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows what everybody does. And it is a little bit insular at times, but it's also got such a strong community feel. Everybody looks out for each other. They take care of each other. And if some bad luck befalls one family or one specific person, everybody will club together and give as much help as they can, whether it's with time or with food or financially or however they feel like they can best contribute to this person's downfall and make it a little bit easier for them. It is something that I love seeing, especially when somebody comes from like the big city and the hubbub of all of that, and they move away to these small little places. Maybe they like own a cafe, or they've bought a B&B or something that they kind of take themselves out of the hubbub of like London life, and they move to like this tiny little seashell bay, for example, and just set up a new life there, find new friends, find a new romance. I love reading about books like that. Question 5 is, what are some relationships that you enjoy reading about? I love reading about twins. I'm not a twin myself, but for such a long time when I was younger, I wanted to be a twin. As soon as I discovered what the concept of being a twin was, I wanted one. And I knew that there was no logistic way for me to have a twin. I just really wanted to have one. So reading books that feature twins in them quite heavily was kind of like living vicariously through that demand and that desire that I had for life. So I loved books like Double Act by Jacqueline Wilson, or the books that were written about like the Mary-Kate and Ashley TV series that I just obsessed with when I was younger. I haven't read books like The Twins at St. Clair's, but a recent book that I have read that features twins in it was Faking It by Portia McIntosh, where one of the twin sisters completely overtakes the life of her other twin sister because her other sister is going to jail. Similarly to that, I also love reading books about sisterly relationships. I also don't have a sister. I'm not an only child. I do have a brother, but I always wanted a sister when I was growing up. And I specifically remember even when my mother was pregnant with my brother, specifically demanding that it would be a sister, and then breaking down on the phone when I figured out that I wasn't getting one. There's something about sisterly relationships that really calls out to me. I think it's because they're such a close friendship most of the time that I love listening to that kind of thing. I love reading about that kind of thing. I love watching sisterly relationships on TV as well. It's just kind of a living vicariously through it again situation. Question number 6, what are some buzzwords in the title of the book that will draw you in? And it's actually cafes, something that I've spoken about before. But if I see that a book is set in a cafe or has any lick of a connection to a cafe, I am all over it. I obsess with books about cafes and like little cupcakes that you can order from the counter and how they do the latte art on their coffees. I just obsess with reading about books. They're featured in like cute little cafes that are so cozy and so community focused. It's one of my favorite things to read about. Question number 7 is, what are some things on the cover that will draw you in? I love illustrated covers. They're everywhere, but that's a good thing for me because I feel like an illustrated cover just makes the book a little bit more cozy for me. I don't know how that connection came to my head, but it just feels like if you're reading a book that has a cover that has an illustration on it in any way, it just really connects to me in some way. I also really love books that have animals on the cover, and especially if the animal on the cover is a cat. I am a cat fan. I'm not like a bigger cat fan than I am a dog fan, but I've always grown up with cats at home. We've always had cats as pets. And I just love reading about the relationship that people have with their pet cats and kind of connecting it to how I had relationships with the cats that I had when I was growing up. Especially a book that comes to my mind with a relationship with a cat and their owner is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, where Chloe Brown kind of rescues a cat that has climbed up a tree recently, and then she gets really connected to it, and you can just see how much she loves this animal that she was never expecting to have enter her life. Non-fiction buzzwords. What are some non-fiction buzzwords that draw you in? Memoirs. Especially if it's a celebrity memoir, and especially if it's a celebrity that I really admire and whose career I really love following. For example, I have really loved Becoming by Michelle Obama. It's one of the best books that I read in 2020, without question. I also really enjoyed Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness, who is one of the gurus on Queer Eye. And I also really loved Between the Stops by Sandy Toksvig, who is the presenter of QI, but she kind of writes a memoir about her life, but bases all of the chapters around the stops between her house and BBC Studios where she films QI. I thought it was such an interesting way to kind of tie in her life right now to how her life was as she was growing up and got to where she is right now. Question number 9. Are there any kind of medical or physical conditions of the characters that you are drawn to? I connect very strongly with characters who are struggling with their mental health. It's something that has affected me for quite a while, and I'm pretty sure that it's something that has affected almost everyone you know in some way. There's so many people out there whose mental health isn't as good as it should be, isn't as good as they would like it to be, and they do just need a little bit of help to get back on track. When I read a character who's going through the same struggles as I am, who is suffering from the same things as I am, maybe they have quite a lot of problems with anxiety, maybe they have quite a few issues with depression, reading a character who's going through that genuinely makes me feel like I'm not alone in going through it. Question number 10. Are there any times in the seasons or are there any times in history or in the future that you really love reading about? I love a book set in autumn. There's something just so cozy about reading about pumpkin carving or getting pumpkin spice latte from your local Starbucks, or characters who are putting on like 25 different layers to go outside because the temperatures are starting to drop and the nights are getting a little bit chilly. I love reading about autumn. I love being in autumn. And anything that has to do with autumn goes straight onto my bookshelves. Bonus question number 1. Are there any bookish buzzwords that you haven't mentioned yet? The Titanic. I love the Titanic. I have a quite unhealthy obsession with the Titanic in that it is kind of the source of a lot of my 2 a.m. Wikipedia rabbit holes. And I like to feel like I'm a kind of bottomless fountain of knowledge about a ship that lasted for like 3 days. If there's a book set on the Titanic, I'm all over it. I know that one of Adiba Jaigidar's books that's coming out in the future is going to be set on the Titanic, and it's kind of like a money heist, lesbian love affair book. I cannot wait to read it. It sounds like Ocean's 11 crossed with the Titanic, which is just, I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Bonus question number 2, what bookish buzzwords or boxes will turn you off a book? I do not like reading books about cheating. I don't like cheating in my personal life. It's not something that I like to seek out for in a book. It's not something that I enjoy reading about. I don't like reading about how a character has to bounce back from infidelity. I don't like reading about how their character's boyfriend or girlfriend is such an awful person that they would go out and cause so much pain to the person that they are supposedly in love with. It's just not something that I enjoy reading. Those are some of the things that I absolutely love looking for when I'm reading a book. Do you agree with any of these? Do you disagree with any of these? Or do you know of any books that feature the things that I have spoken about? Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.